Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And what happened with the Parsha? Of course, we haven't been doing the Parsha for a while because of Pesach. Here we are. And it's Acharei Mot, this coming Shabbat. We will be reading in the Torah in Parsha Acharei Mot, which the first part of it is about the high priest entering the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. So it also turns out to be the Torah reading for Yom Kippur morning. In the course of the weeks or the years, we have actually gone through all the Rashis on Acharei Mot, and so I'm turning back to the Parsha, to Torah Tmima, to take a look at it, and we'll see how we're doing on this, right? So, of course, it opens up with saying, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, the Lord spoke, Hashem spoke to Moses, Acharei Mot shnei bnei Aaron, after the death of the two sons of Aaron. Interesting opening. Bekorvatam lifnei Hashem, when they drew close to God, to Hashem, Vayamutu, and they died. Okay. So it gives the reason for their passing as they're drawing close to God, and they die. And it is an interesting opening. Why? Why this particular opening? And we're going to look at that. Excuse me. So here we are, the first Torah Tmima on this. Acharei Mot v'gomer. In other words, Acharei Mot, Shnei bnei Aaron, etc., etc. V'gomer means etc. Tanya. So there is a baraita. There's an early source. This is actually from the Yerushalmi, from the Talmud Yerushalmi. Yoma means the day in Aramaic, the day being, of course, Yom Kippur. And right at the very beginning, Perek Aleph, chapter 1, Halacha Aleph. I've explained that the way the Yerushalmi is divided is into chapters and halachot. Halachot is what the subdivisions are called, at any rate. Tanya. It also means, by the way, this Tanya tells you that it's a technical term that means that the source comes from a time that's contemporaneous with the Mishnah. The Mishnah was edited, we might say, or compiled in the year 200. So we're looking at a source that's earlier than the year 200. Okay. Lama hu maskir mitatan beyom HaKippurim. So the question is, why is their death, the death of Aaron's two sons, mentioned on Yom Kippur? What does the one have to do with the other? Lelamedcha, to teach you, shekeshem sheyom HaKippurim mechaper al Yisrael, to teach you that just as the Day of Atonement atones for Israel, Kach mitatan shel tzadikim mechaperet al Yisrael. So the death of the righteous atones for Israel. Wow. Wow. Because this sounds awfully close to a basic principle of Christianity. It's interesting. And here it is. Okay. It's just that what Christianity does is they single out an individual, and after the Council of Nicaea, they decided that that this was in fact a manifestation of God. And correct me if I'm wrong, but otherwise, the principle of the death of the righteous having an atoning quality is here, right here, right here. So. That's not what we're going to discuss, I don't believe, in Torah Tmima. We're going to look at it from a perspective within Judaism itself. And here he goes. Lo nitpa'er erech ha'inyan. That is to say, it is not clear. The erech, generally erech means arrangement or value or something like that. I did not find this translation of the word erech, but it seemed to me that logic would be the right way to translate this. In other words, it's not clear what the logic is, right? Shemitat tzadikim, that in fact the death of the righteous, mechaper, acts as has this atoning quality. Umatam hadabar davar, and there's no reason. It doesn't say what the reason is for this. ונראה על פי מה שכתוב בפרקי דרבי Eliezer, פרק י"ז. And that it would appear, he feels, that based on what's written in this book, it's extant, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the chapters of Rabbi Eliezer, Perek Yud Zayin, chapter 17, Be'inyan mitat Shaul, where it's discussing the death of Saul, Dichtiv Bay, concerning whom it is written. Now, this is Shmuel Bet, Samuel, the second book of Samuel. The second book of Samuel actually deals with King David. Saul dies at the end of the first book of Samuel, but there is a reference here in chapter 21 of the second book of Samuel that makes reference to Saul. Okay, and we'd have to go back and read this particular chapter. It's a very interesting chapter regarding the Gibeonites, etc. Okay, and having to do with a sense that the Israelites' prayers, they were suffering some kind of condition going on, whether it was a famine or whatever, something like that. So there it says, Vayikbaru et atzmot Shaul, that the Israelites were able to get the remains of Saul's remains, his bones, literally, right? So they buried the bones of Saul. Vaye'ater Elohim la'aretz acharei. And so essentially it means God was appeased for the land after that. Okay, so that's the verse in Samuel 2. I looked up that verse for the English translation because the etar wasn't so clear, okay? But the way they translated there was God responded, in other words, the Vayater, God responded to the plea of the land thereafter. Okay. Fazeh Lishono. So now he's going to quote Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Kevan shira'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shegamlu lo chesed, that God saw, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, saw, that they acted with loving kindness to Saul, right? That the people this was some time after his death, but he hadn't been properly buried, etc. Then Gemilut Chasadim means acts of loving kindness, and specifically, Shetsamu, they fasted, Ubachu, they cried, Vesafdulo, and they mourned for him, Kemevoar Pasuk, as the verse clarifies, Miyad nitmale rachamim. Immediately, God was filled with mercy. Or again, maybe we could say love even. Shne'emar, as it states, Vayater Elohim la'aretz. So it uses that term, that verse that we quoted, Adkan, etc. This is the end of the quote from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Mevo'ar mizeh, and from this it becomes clear, Shelo hamita ba'atzma mechaperet, that it isn't simply the death itself that atones, Ela hakavod v'ha'evel shinotnin b'mitat tzadikim, but rather the honor and the mourning that is practiced regarding the death of the righteous people. De kibud zeh hu kvod Hashem. Why? Because showing honor to righteous people is tantamount to showing honor to God. Because these righteous people represent divine values. Because essentially, what is a tzaddik? A tzaddik is someone who devotes their life to trying to perform the will of God. And showing respect for that person is showing respect for a life that is devoted to fulfilling the divine will. And there you can connect the dots. So that's how he explains that. So interesting point of view. Yes, David.
Yeah, as soon as I can get off mute. So
That's a good
the
problem.
question is, okay, honoring righteous people, but what does that have to do with the atonement aspect? You can honor righteous people without the atonement portion, right? So I'm not connecting that dot. Maybe I missed it.
Okay, so the connection is that it says in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, when God saw how they were treating Saul's remains, and I'll put in parenthetically that, of course, Saul was rejected by God, but he still was the first king of Israel, and he also did many things that were righteous. The standards of righteousness in the Bible are very, very high. But the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which assumes that Saul was a tzaddik, okay, is the fact that when God saw how the respect with which they treated Saul's remains, he was filled with a sense of compassion. God was filled with a sense of compassion when he saw how they treated the remains of King Saul. I mean, there's a lot you can get out of this in terms of, I mean, Saul himself wasn't alive at the time. But
Right.
the level of respect that people show, even to someone's remains, right, is still, at least if we buy into what Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is saying, is something that's very, very fundamental and very important in terms of being a God-fearing person or a God-loving person. That
But
God,
is that mean that it's actually the people themselves get or are receiving atonement because they didn't, because of their treatment of Saul, and now because of how they're treating him once he's passed away? Is that the atonement?
no,
Because
what we'd
what's
have to,
where yeah.
I think if I'm understanding where you're coming from, they did not properly bury him. They did not treat the death of Saul with the kind of respect and that he deserved. And,
Ah,
and he wasn't buried properly. It was pretty. It was humiliating and stuff like that. And now they had set that right. They had corrected.
okay. So that's the atonement we're talking about.
It.
Was
Good.
is setting that right in the okay, got
Right.
it. Okay.
And
Thank
that,
you.
yeah. So the reason they were being punished to begin with is because, I mean, so it turns out that that was the reason why there was this punishment going on at the time. But I think there are really some profound and beautiful notions, because respect is not something that Western civilization seems to understand as well as perhaps Oriental civilizations. That respect is huge, and because what it does is it shows a certain attitude about a person, about the creation of human beings, and the value of human beings by showing respect. And it seems to me, I'm not saying that respect can't be selfish. You can be respectful for selfish reasons, I suppose. But it seems to me that from an emotional standpoint, there's less narcissism involved. Yeah, he was a respectful narcissist. That sort of is a contradiction in terms, okay? On the other hand, sometimes we see how love and lust are mixed up together and confused. So people don't understand that. If there's, I can go on a little bit more. Let me try and see what I can do here. Okay. So his next comment, this I believe is his next one. Yep, yep. All right. Acharei Mot18 b'nei Aaron. So this is another one, and this he finds in the Sifra, Torah Kohanim. You've heard me refer to this many times that Rashi refers to it. So this is this halachic midrash on the book of Leviticus. So Acharei Mot18 b'nei Aaron. So after the death of the two sons of Aaron, and it says Tanya. Now I believe, and I could be wrong about this, that the Sifra certainly predates, I believe, the Talmud itself, because the Talmud will quote things, I believe, from the Sifra. So anyway, so Tanya, here we have that technical word again. Minayin, how do we know? Shekeshem she'averat shnehem shaveh, So how do we know that that just as their transgression, shaveh, was equal, that is, that they both transgressed the same way, kach mitachnehem shaveh, so their death was exactly the same. Talmud lomar, for this reason, Scripture teaches, Acharei mot shnei bnei Aaron. That's what Scripture says after the death of the two sons of Aaron. Now, I'm going to anticipate what Baruch Halevi Epstein is going to say, what the Torah Tamima is going to say, but I could be wrong, and he might take this in a whole different direction. Here's the point they're making. Could this have been written differently? In other words, if the whole point is that God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's two sons, well, how many sons? We've read this already. We read this earlier on in Leviticus. How many sons died? We know this already. We know it. Okay? So it could have simply said that God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's sons. It just could have said that. We would have known that it was, that it was not of an Avihu. We know that already. Why the mention of Shnei? And there's an understanding in rabbinic literature that when a number such as this is given, that's not really necessary. It's to tell that they were identical. So that the point of this drush, the way it's hanging, is that it says Shnei Vnei Aharon and doesn't just say Vnei Aharon. Now, I'm saying that without true confessions. I have not had a chance yet to look at what Torah Tamima has to say about this, and that's simply based on what I have learned in the course of my years of study. So, yes, Alex.
So Aaron's sons dying like they did, I didn't know that it had anything to do with atonement. That's a new angle.
Yes, it is. It is. And that's
Hmm.
what this rabbinic material is doing in this deep dive into the text. There's tons and tons of oceans of rabbinic material that ultimately is based on the texts themselves. So yeah, we don't. This is saying, that was the previous statement. Here, it's just clarifying that and what significance that has, we may have to check. I haven't explained that, but here it's simply saying that they committed the same sin and they died the same way. That's the point being made here. Okay, we've moved on to a whole new idea now. We've dealt with the atonement part, and now we're on to a new idea. So let's take a look. So Aveirach Nehem, right? So it's saying the transgression of the two of them. V'vaidai haita shaveh. It's clear, it's obvious that they committed the same sin. Shehoru halacha. What was their sin? This is very interesting because it's not, again, explicitly stated in the Bible, but the rabbis are struggling to understand and somehow, may I even say, justify why they were treated this way. And you're going to be surprised at the answer if you don't know it already. Why? What was their sin? Shehoru halacha bifnei Moshe. They were teaching Jewish law. Their actions was not something that Moses had told them to do. And in a sense, and this was done publicly, and in a sense, they were telling the Israelites, this is what is required. In other words, bringing that offering, that incense, this is what they did, right, is something that is part of the ritual of dedicating the altar. And they'd never been told to do that. And that is clear. That is stated. It says they did something they were not told to do. And putting it on the other side, the sort of obverse side of that statement is they were moreh halacha bifnei rabo. We're back into an issue here of respect. Moses, after all, went up Mount Sinai. He received the Torah, okay? He was in a very unique place to teach divine will. And it's not unless you're in that kind of situation, you've got to be very careful about telling people what divine will was. And if you look at the context of what was going on in the temple, it was meticulous, every single action. So if you're somewhat familiar, and lahavdil, we would say, in other words, it's not a fair example, it's not a fair comparison, but if you know anything about the ritual at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington Cemetery, you know that every single detail of what is done at that tomb is significant. How many steps they take, how long they take to do it, etc., etc. Well, figure that in spades when it came to the ritual in the temple and how that was done. And we, of course, know that that is part of showing deep respect for royalty. So, for example, if you go to see the monarch of England, right, the King of England, you are instructed ahead of time how far you have to stop, what you're supposed to do, exactly how you're supposed to behave when you encounter the sovereign. And so this is a universal understanding of how you show respect. And their doing this was a capital offense because this was before God. Okay, but so he's reminding us of that. Kemivuar b'Parshat Shmini, as is clarified in the interpretations of Parshat Shmini. Shmini means the eighth day of the dedication of the sanctuary, and this is when this took place. V'darish shegam mitat shnehem hayta shaveh be'erech uvizman. And so this drash, right, this interpretation is interpreting that the death of the two of them was also, gam, haita, was, shaveh, equal, be'erech, in its quality, uvizman, and its timing. They died at the very same instant. They died in the very same way. Vayelef, here we go. Here's what he's saying. Vayalif, and he learns this out. Mi yitur lashon shnei, right? He learns this out from the unnecessary use of the term two, what I was saying to you before. Dahayadua, because it is known. Hu sheshnayim metu, because we already knew that the two of Aaron's sons died. He had 4 sons altogether. We know already that 2 of them died. Umevuar lefanenu b'kama makomot, and it is clarified in front of us in a number of places, and already, in other words, to try to put this simply, it's saying there are any number of sources, right, that clarify dehechi deba mispar sheni, that in cases where the number sheni, that the number 2, b'makom, that where it comes, b'makom she'enot tzarich legufei, where it comes in a place where it isn't really needed. In other words, it isn't needed to tell us that there were 2 of them, right? Ba lahorot, it comes to teach. Al hashtavatam, it comes to teach us that both those items are equal in some way or another. Kamosha katavnu la'el, and he's referencing his own commentary here, as we wrote above, the Parshat Metzorah, where we wrote in the Parsha of Metzorah, Beperek Shtei Tzipurim, where it's talking about in the Parsha Metzorah, that has to do with sarat. I'm trying not to translate it as leprosy, right? And it talks about where he is cleansed of his leprosy, and part of it involves actually bringing some offerings, and it mentions 2 birds, chayot, 2 live birds. Uvesamuch be'inyan shnei seirei Yom Kippurim. And right next to it, regarding the issue of 2 goats, the 2 goats of Yom Kippur, Ye'uyan Sham. Check it out there. There will be more detail about how this operates there. And I will stop here for today and take any questions you might have. So we would be going on to the next verse, God willing. Next year, God willing.
I had a question.
Yes.
They died like 5, 6 chapters ago. Why
Yeah.
are they mentioned now?
I would say that that is answered by the very first comment we had today. It's coming, what it comes to do is it clarifies certainly the rabbinic attitude that says that Nadav and Avihu were actually tzaddikim. That yes, there is this argument that they died because they were teaching halacha in front of Moses, but at the same time, what's beautiful about this is it isn't a one-sided approach, because in a sense, what it's saying is they got so excited, Nadav and Avihu got so excited, they thought they were doing something good, right? They thought they were bringing an offering of incense before God, and they thought that was a good thing. Okay, but they didn't think carefully about all the implications. They were simply, this is me, this is how I understand it, were simply acting by their emotions. They were driven to do this by their emotions. They didn't think about all the implications of what they were doing, and they had to pay a penalty for it. But there are some beautiful things. There are some beautiful interpretations which Rashi mentions and he quotes, where Moses turns to Aaron and he says, after they died, he turns to Aaron and says, I thought that was going to be you and me. I thought you and I were going to be this, so to speak, sacrifice before God. And there is this notion that the death of the righteous has this atoning quality, and that's why it's being mentioned. And that was the point of the first comment we read today. And yeah. Did you want to follow that up, Judith?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop at this point. I'm going to stop the recording.